I think it'll be okay for
If
you
you
guys.
talk loud enough, I'll start repeating the question too.
Yeah. So just wanted to welcome you to our Spongy Moth presentation with our DEC Region 4 Forester, Scott Moxham. This is a presentation that was put together by the town supervisor and the tree council. And Scott's here to answer any questions. He's got a short presentation, and then some people weren't able to attend, so I have some online questions. And then we'll be recording it. So if you missed something, you want to watch it again, we'll post the video so you guys can watch it whenever you need to.
Again, thanks to everyone for coming. Just here to talk about the spongy moth. It's recently changed its name to spongy moth. It was formerly known as the gypsy moth. It was termed a derogatory name, and I'm going to try catching myself anytime I slip up saying it. If I do, I apologize ahead of time. But I've been calling it a gypsy moth for the last 20 years. So just kind of a little history on the pest and what it is, how we approach it, the problems with it. I think that will help kind of answer a lot of your questions, what you're seeing in your properties, your yards, your trees, and try talking about what the outlook of the pest is, and just try getting a little bit understanding what it is, and any other questions in between. So just when we get talking about the pest, it's a cyclical population. It was first introduced in the US around the late 1800s, 1869 to be exact. And it started out in Massachusetts. It was brought here, introduced by a amateur entomologist. The individual thought it would produce more silk than the silkworm. The individual had cages around his trees, and they escaped, and he let the individuals know that what he had done could be detrimental. But at that time, it was viewed that it was not going to be a significant impact in the environment. Little did we know at that time. So then they kind of went unnoticed or unchecked for about 20 years surrounding the Massachusetts area. And so here's a little timeline of how that population has really grown. I mean, here we are currently in 2018, one of the more recent photos I had of the distribution. In 100 years, 120 years, it has grown quite a bit. And looking forward here, when we're looking at the current range or where we think that pest could move out, it's currently only occupying about a third of its potential range. So you blow that up and look that out on a map, where the whole eastern seaboard out to the Midwestern states. So that's the big picture of the pest and the long-term implications of the defoliation that we see and the hurdles or challenges that we will have regarding the pest. Like I said, it's been here since the late 1800s, and it's sporadically, it's a cyclical population. So trying to just get into some basics of it. As I said before, it was introduced from an individual, or he imported it from Europe, and it's been here since, like I said, the late 1800s. When I say cyclical population, meaning that it is always persistent in the environment every year. We do have the numbers to a certain extent. We might not see full defoliation. We would typically just see feeding, and it would probably go unnoticed in the environment. About I say on average, about 10 years, we see an explosion in the population. And that's kind of where we're at right now. We're technically probably in about year 2. Last year, there was a good amount of areas in the surrounding Capital District, Columbia County, Rensselaer County, that had seen extensive damage and defoliation. Western New York, on the other hand, they have been seeing it for a little bit longer. Some areas in Western New York are looking at year 4. So, like I said, we're in year 2, and I'm not saying that we would expect to see year 4. There's a lot of other variables, but I like to think that we're fortunate right now because year 2 is a lot better than year 4. As I said, persistent in the environment during an outbreak, it's usually 1 to 3 years. And there's some variable factors that will factor in that can cause that to be the population to crash quickly, or as I said recently in Western New York, it's persisting a little bit longer. So that's we look at some things every year to try gauging how extensive what we expect the population to be, and are we expecting to see a defoliation event? And so it is kind of a tough decision, or what we look at is the number of egg masses that we're seeing on the trees, and then how many of them are viable egg masses, or I'll talk a little bit later about it. Some of the other pests that might see or have an impact on the population. And what we're seeing here, last note, is it has a large host species. So that means it feeds on everything. It puts the hungry caterpillar to shame. It just has a voracious appetite, and it does not stop. So that large host species here kind of is broken up into 3 categories. The susceptible, that's kind of their preferred food source. Once they hatch, they're going to try going to those trees as quickly as possible. The second is resistant, and typically we won't, in a non-outbreak year, we're not going to see really any feeding. But in an outbreak, all bets are off that they're probably going to go to their susceptible or preferred host species. And once, as we're seeing, the oaks right now are very bare, they're going to probably try going to some of the other less favorable species. And then that last column there, immune, they rarely, if ever, see really any feeding or defoliation. So that's kind of when we start looking at discussing trees in the environment, especially in the urban community forestry. That's why we kind of stress the importance of having species diversity. Because when we do have these events, we want to balance it out, so we would hate to see a full out defoliation of a whole street. I know a lot of us are probably seeing that, especially in this general area. We do have a lot of oaks growing in the landscape. So that being one of its most preferred food sources, that's why we're seeing a large scale canopy loss. The next thing we try when we're looking at a pest, we try understanding the life cycle. Because if we're going to try managing it, we got to figure out when it's most susceptible, to what degree, or what techniques can we approach it with to have the most success. We don't want to, so we really want to try looking at that life cycle and start figuring out where is it most susceptible. What we do have going on, what we do know is we get one population a year. So they're going to hatch in springtime as the leaves are coming out. They're going to feed heavily. We're going to see in an outbreak, we do see a defoliation. And then we do see the tree does send out another set of leaves. So that's one of the reasons why I'm getting a lot of questions of why is there not more being done, is typically it does not kill the tree. It does cause a defoliation, and the tree does recover. It's about, typically if we see an extended defoliation or multi-year, 2, 3, 4 years, that's when we start getting a little bit more worried about the life of the tree. Typically, the root system has enough carbohydrates and starches stored up that it can sustain a multi-year defoliation event without killing the tree. The only caveat to that is if we start seeing a drought or anything else that might stress out the trees or reduce in vigor, at that point, those trees do become more susceptible to being losing the battle with the pest. But that typically is more of a secondary infection, or it makes it more susceptible to another insect or disease. So looking at going to the next part of the life cycle, the eggs have hatched. We're kind of right in the middle of it right now, the caterpillar stage, 6 to 8 weeks. I even, for round numbers, I say 10 weeks, just because probably the first couple weeks I don't even really notice, or many of us are not noticing when they start hatching. They are really tiny, and so I say caterpillars, that life cycle there, about 10 weeks. So I've been estimating it. We're at probably, from the time I've been getting calls, on bearer of bad news, I'm guessing probably about halfway through that. So that's going to be our hard part. But looking at some of the size of the caterpillars, they may be further along in that life stage, because as they're growing up, they go through instars in the caterpillar stage. So there's 5 or 6 larval instars, and the heavy feeding typically goes on in the later instars, 4, 5, and 6. So that's going with what I'm seeing on the ground. I think we might be in those later stages and looking at the size of the caterpillars. But looking at that graph there, we would still expect to potentially see them still going through to July. So that's going to still result in a few weeks of heavy feeding. After the caterpillar stage, you'll see them congregate, getting ready to go to a pupae stage. They typically will stay in that stage where they go into a cocoon for 1 to 2 weeks. Then they're gonna hatch out of that. The adults, they're gonna be in a moth form. During the moth form, the female does not fly, the male flies, but there is no more feeding on the leaves. So trying to be optimistic here, we have conservatively 4 or 5 weeks, I want to say, conservatively, for left of dealing with the feeding, the sounds, the mess, unfortunately. At that adult stage, that's when they're going to reproduce. And it's a very short stage. They die after that. The female will lay the eggs right after that. And then we start looking at, that's when we start seeing the egg masses here, say late August, September. And that's when we start kind of trying to get a feel for what forecasting the population next year is. How many egg masses are we seeing? Are they everywhere, just from 2 feet off the ground to the top of the tree? And then when we start gauging that, we look at the egg masses typically will hold between 100 up to 1,000 eggs. So that kind of gives you a good indication. If you're looking at your trees and you see 50 egg masses on there, that's potentially 50,000 caterpillars. And as I said, putting that hungry caterpillar to shame. So that's really, when we start looking at this life cycle, it starts understanding how complicated it can be when we start talking about controls and how to combat the pest, because overall it's a pretty short life cycle. And then when we start talking about some of the approaches here, that window even gets a little bit smaller. So there's a few chemicals that are out there that are showing to have fairly good results in combating the population, but they come with their difficulties. The top one there, the Bacillus Terengiensis, the BTK, That has it's mostly effective in the early beginning of life stages. So timing of the applications can be difficult if, as I said, most times we're probably already missing that first couple weeks there. So either we have to spray for that early or have planning in place to do it. And that is a naturally occurring soil bacterium. It's a biological insecticide, so it is really safe. It stays in the environment for a very short time. It's very pointed towards the moth family. So it's a great tool. The drawback is it typically has to be applied through an aerial application. And that's where the biggest hurdles come, is the cost that's associated with that, and just spraying anything aerially, the public interest in that. Just any time that it's been done, it has often been difficult, or it's been on larger landscape properties or multiple parcels that are very large landowners. That's really the only times I've heard of it really taking place outside of either federal or state land or on the cutting edge. And so that's where it's often impractical. The next area down there, I will butcher those names if I try saying them. They're an insect growth regulator. And so those, again, they have a very limited time when they're most effective. They're most effective during the beginning stages of the infestation, or that early instars. And again, they're an insect growth regulator. And I believe both of those are a restricted, or majority of the chemicals are in those are restricted. So you need to have a certified pesticide applicator. So that adds cost to that, having that treatment done. And then the last one is broad spectrum insecticides. There are general insecticides that we see at the home and garden stores. Everyone asks about them. It's a trouble question, or I say it kind of depends, because almost everything has to be sprayed in the top of the tree. If we have a 100-foot tree, that makes it very difficult and almost impossible to do a quality application. So a broad spectrum pesticide, it kind of is indiscriminate, and it will go after, or if it is applied, it will kill off any insects that could be beneficial or not just the pest that we're trying to go after. So I have a difficult time with those ones, because anytime we're talking about chemicals, we want to be responsible. And if we're going to use chemicals, we want to use the least amount of product possible and applicate it in the safest manner possible. So when we're talking about broad spectrums, if they're in congregations, I tell people it depends. The other approach is scraping them off when they're congregating into a bucket of soapy water. I feel if you're spraying a broad spectrum, you're almost just doing the same thing if you're just scooping them into a bucket. But I tell everyone it's what they're comfortable with. And but so that's really our tough issues here with this pest, is the chemicals that are used are very not restrictive in some areas, but then the difficulty of applying them, because we don't have the ability to jump up and get into the top of a tree. So I go back to that life cycle that we start looking at, and the handful of products that would be active or work very well in the population. The BT, the Bacillus Terengiensis, that's mostly works well during the first and second instars. And the first and second instars typically last about 1 week each. So we're looking at the very beginning of April, maybe May, depending on how active the population is or how early it's getting a start. And like I said, so you almost have to be spraying that beforehand, but it's not a very active chemical, or it doesn't last very long on the tree. So that's kind of hurdle number one with that. The insect growth regulators, again, they're good through, or recommended application timing is between the first and third instars. So we're still really less than a month into the start of an infestation, and we're not recognizing that oftentimes. So that's kind of that's where we are. We're in that beginning area where it can be most effective, but then the hurdle of applying it to a whole tree. And so we're very limited in what I would call feasible or practical approaches here. So then kind of like, well, how do we deal with this? And it's generally, it is natural enemies that are naturally occurring in the soil. There is a viral pathogen and a fungal pathogen. And then the third one is some parasitic wasps. But the top two are really what causes the population to crash. And that typically will lag behind a 1 or 2 year cycle. They're present in the environment, but they get caught off guard just like we did. So it takes them a couple years to ramp up, and we got to have favorable conditions for them. And so when we do have some wet weather where it's not necessarily the best conditions for that, you would think for pathogens, but that typically will slow them down. So that's what we're waiting for, what we're hoping to see. And so far we are seeing some of that when I go do inspections, talking to other foresters, and even yourself, if you could be looking at the caterpillars, if you're seeing the A and B on those are what what we would be looking for if they're being attacked by either the pathogen or the fungal pathogen, or the virus. Sorry. If you're going up to a caterpillar and it looks like it's not moving and it's in an inverted V, that's signs that it has been attacked by the viral pathogen, and that's naturally occurring. And what it does is it gets into the system of the caterpillar and disrupts it and kills it. Just trying to think of the nice way to put it. But then the second is the fungal pathogen, and that you'll go up to that, or you'll see that it will be just hanging vertically on the tree, and it will look like a skeleton. So that's a good way of trying to figure out how active those two things are in the environment and acting on the pest. And the last point there is, those are what really causes the population to crash, goes away, and then it will kind of lay dormant again for 10, 15 years, and we'll just see it slowly grow up again. And I've gotten a handful of questions, or when I do get calls, they've been pretty active. Asking, do birds eat them? Do mammals eat them? There is, to some extent, some mice do feed on them. I did see a video online, I believe, of possums eating them. But the birds don't seem to really favor them. But again, that they're just so abundant that even if they had an appetite for them, it still wouldn't make a drastic change in the population. So we're really stuck dependent on those. And like I said, where this doesn't typically kill the tree, that's why we don't put a lot of resources to it. Even though we all grumble, we're all there in the same boat saying, I'm tired of this. I hate cleaning up this. I hate seeing a treeless or a leafless tree. So it kind of gets back to cancer. What can I do? And that everything before that was really, it's when asking what can I do, it's kind of being patient. As much as it is a difficult thing to sit here and watch and having to deal with it. It is letting those the virus and the fungal pathogens ramp up and take care of the population. A few things on here on the slides of what people can do. It's not going to significantly alter or affect the population, but I feel it helps, or it makes landowners feel that they're trying to combat it, fighting it. Here on the tube on the right, you're probably, if you drive around, you're probably seeing almost all of those right now. The top right-hand one, duct tape around the tree. I wouldn't say it works. It's going to catch some of them, but not a lot. But again, I don't tell anyone not to try it. If they want to put duct tape around it, I say, have at it. Just make sure just checking that every week. If it's getting full, change it. The bottom right-hand corner is the name's. It's a glue, and you apply it to a piece of paper or something that you stuck to the tree, and it's really just a extra large fly trap. It's much stickier. I'm not the biggest fan of those, just more so for the fact that every time I've played or attempted to try doing that, I've made a mess of myself and it sticks everywhere. But then the other thing I don't like about it is it will also capture the beneficial insects that we're also trying to save. So our ladybugs, it's really non-discriminate. So any bug that comes in contact with either the duct tape or the sticky trap is going to get stuck to it, and you're going to lose that. Tanglewood. Yes. Tanglefoot. Thank you. Sticky side out. Yes. Another question?
Is there an ideal time to do that? Like, is it too late now?
So what happens usually is that the early end stars, they feed, and then they do come down to stay out of cover, or they've ate, they're hungry, they're full, they want to rest. So that's a good time. Really, those two approaches, it can be any time, because what happens here as we get into the later stages, they will come down and they want to start congregating. And so that's kind of where I tell anyone, at any point throughout this, it's a good time. Is it going to drastically impact the population? Not significantly, but again, when you're tired of hearing them munching or they're eating all your trees, you want to feel that you're doing something to help them out. In the top left-hand corner is a burlap. You take a 2x2 or a 3x3 square of it and put it against the tree and tie a rope halfway around it and flap the upper half over the rope. So when the caterpillars do come down from the tops of the tree, they're going to look for cover so they're not being predated on. So the theory there is they will come underneath the burlap and congregate, and that allows you to scrape them off in a group. And then the other two are more geared towards when we get through the event. So when we start looking into September afterwards until the next start of the next growing season, after the adults lay the eggs. This is where it's not a foolproof plan again, but again, it's every egg mass can be potentially 1,000 caterpillars. And if we are going to see a third year, I start saying every little bit can help the tree. So it's scraping off the egg sacs, and you can either go up there with a knife, a sheetrock knife or putty knife scrape them off into a bucket of soapy water. Or the other option is a horticulture soap and spraying it on the egg sac. That will suffocate the eggs, and that will kill them for next year. So that's a handful less caterpillars next year that we're going to be feeding on.
How hardy are they on the tree? I mean, do you really have to spray it, or do you easily knock them down if you're about
They would, I could see that, but if you're just scraping them off, they potentially can still stay viable. So that can be, we recommend, I usually say anything that scrapes them off, if I'm getting some of them, that's better than none of them. So I really try taking that approach. And then the last thing what can we do throughout this is if we do start seeing a drought event, or we start getting a really hot summer, especially in the landscape, it's feasible, practical. In the forest setting, it's not. Is just most of us might be watering our lawn or watering our flowers, watering the tree, just giving it a little extra. That will help it through the times, keep the vigor up. Because if that tree starts getting a little bit more stressed, then that's more inclined to die off, or open it up to a secondary attack from a fungus, a root pest. So as I said, anything at this time is just trying to keep that tree happy.
you think the tree spikes fertilize the trees after they can be foliated?
Oh, sorry. Yes. The question was, would it be advisable to fertilize the tree? I tell if you're fertilizing your lawn, it benefits. I wouldn't put a high nitrogen content fertilizer on, but if you're spraying around your lawn, I don't see why that it would help the tree. It just give it a little perk. Keep it happy. So that's. Oh, I don't know what we got here, but.
Is there anybody here that's with the town? Like, is the town gonna do anything for their trees? We all have our own private trees.
Mm-hmm.
So we walk down Lexington Parkway, and in the center, all those trees are gonna be glowing.
Yes.
So I don't know if the town
It was
can
out.
do anything about that, or should we go out and on the committee and
That's the question is what are the towns doing about the trees? We're kind of all in the same battle, really. I mean, they are. That's fine. That was my last slide anyway. So yes, it just had my contact information. So they're in the same boat. So we're really approaching it the same way. The resources aren't really readily available, and it's not easy to spray or take an undertaking. So some of the recommendations I've tried offering up to communities is Niskayuna does have a tree board or a tree committee. Maybe they can get active, or it's a volunteer approach during the fall when it's night. No one really wants to be out in the hot summer trying to scrape egg masses off, but putting up a volunteer group or even a general street tree, or similar landowners coming together and saying, hey, do we want to have an egg scraping party? It's a little different, but it would still allow everyone to everyone's in the same boat, fighting the same fight. So everyone would benefit from that. And so that's really a large, difficult problem. But we don't really have, again, the difficulty in doing the applications. And like typically where it doesn't kill the tree, there's a lot of communities, everyone that's reluctant to do any management per se. I mean, I'll follow that up with, we're doing a spray application in Western New York in some very unique areas that have seen defoliation events for, as I said, multiple years out there, but they're critical habitats, and we've had to work with the Forest Service to get the applications to be done. So it's a delicate and a difficult process.
Yeah, and just to speak for the town, the NIST Unit Tree Council is going to try and make sure that when the egg scraping time is nigh, that they do like another push, an email push, information to residents, because like by that time the leaves may have grown back and memories, you know, like, okay, my tree's fine now. I know it happened to me because I got a lot of them in my yard. So we're going to do a push to see if we can get people to scrape eggs at that time, just as a reminder, maybe even a couple of them. And then we're going to do another information push in the spring, you know, just reminding people that this is the time when they're small and a lot of the things that you do is the most effective. So that's, but the town's not going to do any aerial spraying or anything like that. We don't have that capability. The Tree Council is just going to make sure that the information's timely to people to try and make sure that next year is a little better.
Yes.
I have a question about the pupae stage.
Sure.
What do they do? I mean, like, where are they located when they're doing that chrysalis or whatever you call it?
When they pupate,
Yeah. Is there
that-
a way we can get rid of them then?
you could. The question was during the pupae stage, is that a practical or a good time approach? The pupae stage, you will find them all over the place. They will come down. They're going to be on your sheds, your house, in the nooks and crannies of the trees.
What does it look like?
Just it's going to be like a chrysalis, like with a regular caterpillar. It's going to be brown.
Monarch. I'm not
Yeah.
sure which are-
I wish I had a picture. They're brown. They're not real big, but they, like I said, you're going to see them in everywhere. Tootsie Roll might be, yeah.
So I could knock them into a.
You could scrape them at that point, but again, at that stage, you're looking at that stage, life cycle stage, as 1 to 2 weeks. So it's a very short window. So the more opportune time is the eggs at this approach, because again, when I'm trying to look at approaches, it becomes tedious to some landowners. Are like, oh, I can't. I have to walk, especially if they have a lot of trees in their yard, up to every tree and scrape it up and down, or go searching all over the yard for those in the shed. So the egg sacs, you get a little bit more bang for your buck, really. Just that way, because again, there's so many potential eggs there for next year. Yes.
For the challenge people, with tall trees, that is really an option.
Yeah. So the question was for vertically challenged people, how to best to still try using the egg scraping approach, or what other attempts could be done. The horticulture soap you can buy it at any home garden store. And again, it's not going to get you're not going to be able to shoot it from 5 feet away or 10 feet away. You still have to be next to it and give it a good soaking. Again, I always tell you, you can get what you can reach. I have some people that say, oh, I'm gonna get in a ladder and I'm gonna get as far up as I can into the tree. You do what you feel comfortable and what you're safe with. I tend to like staying on the ground. Yes.
I always thought from the interviews with a couple of them who had about that when you saw a tree that had this big web that we called tent, that was the population.
So the question, So the question was, when some individuals see a tent-like appearance on the tree, is that the same thing as the gypsy moth or spongy moth? Sorry. That is a different pest. That is a fall webworm or eastern tent caterpillar. They are very similar in such a way that they are both defoliators, but we typically don't see them doing large-scale defoliation events. And they are another cyclic population. especially the Eastern tent caterpillar. But they will stay right. Typically, they'll feed, but then they will weave that web and kind of stay right in there. So that's the main difference. But they act the same, but they are different pests. Yes.
Explain the instars. I'm not familiar with the term.
Yeah. So the question was explaining the instars of the pest. Instars are just when they're at that caterpillar stage. When they first come out of the egg sac, they are very tiny, almost unnoticeable. As they grow, they molt a little bit so they can grow bigger. So that's just it's just a technical term of them just growing out. It's kind of like a snake shedding its skin, essentially. It's just the technical term there for as they're growing up. Oh, sorry, behind you.
Just two questions. First of all, I will prep with burlap, you know, that if you're showing, I'm not really catching much, even though my trees are fast. Number two, can I just use insecticidal soap, the hose spray it up and down, the trunk, and if so, how often and how do I approach it?
So the question was regarding using insecticidal soap. You'd have to read the label on that to kind of get the correct application rates. I've never tried. I've never done it that way. It's always, again, when I'm looking at spraying chemicals or using chemicals, even though that's a relatively safe chemical, I still try using it in the means that are going to best suit or attack the pest. So I'm going to try going straight to the egg masses, because if it's just running, if you're spraying it in the tree, it's not really doing its effectiveness, or it's not being effective towards, because at that point, I'm assuming when the insecticidal soap, if you're doing it at the eggs, the life stage, there is no insect, so they wouldn't be crawling around. And if you were spraying it at any other time of the year or throughout the life cycle, it wouldn't be highly effective.
I have a question about the wasp that you talked about.
Yes.
Is there a way that we can introduce that?
I don't think they're even natural to this area.
So the question was about the parasitic wasp, and why have we not introduced any more? That's actually how a lot of them became into. They're not highly effective. So I believe it was in the 1900s, early 1900s. They're not even sure how many were really introduced because there was not a lot of oversight at that time. So it was kind of a mad dash of, oh, let me try this. Let me see if this insect works. So they've never really got a good grasp of how many were introduced, but they were finding out that they're not overly effective in causing the population to crash. But there are some there, they work, but it's more or less any little bit helps. So that's why they've not really released, or they haven't found another effective parasitic wasp that will have a drastic impact on the population.
So what do we hope for with the viral and fungal? Do you need to see with the wet side?
They got to have some dry time. And this time of year, or it just seems like the trend that we're having right now, it dries out and then it gets really wet again. So we're kind of at a balance there, we would prefer a little bit drier conditions, but not so dry that we're into a drought, because then we're going to be stressing the tree. So it's the delicate balance of it all. And, but typically we do see that population ramp up very quickly. Like I said, it usually lags at least a year behind. And at the end of last year, I was noticing some of them already displaying the symptoms of that. And I'm already seeing some this year. So I know it's prevalent in the environment. Now we need it to ramp up.
Is that picture the actual caterpillar that's been infected by the wasp, or is that the lot?
The question that the picture here on the showing the parasitic wasp, that is the egg sac with some tiny flies on it. So what the parasitic wasp will do is it will take its ovipositor and it will basically inject that into the egg mass inside of the eggs, and they will lay their eggs inside of them. Inside, Mother Nature's a cruel world.
So, as far as large-scale treatment, apparently the state is offering federal land. Is that what's happening?
So the question was, are there any large-scale treatments going on? Just kind of condensing that a little bit. To my knowledge, there has not been any town efforts really going on. Like I said, this application that the state is doing on state forest lands and some park lands, they are unique areas, in my understanding. And so what really the chemical that is being applied is, it's called glypcheck. And it is through the Forest Service. It's very expensive because they have to breed a bunch of the virus, or they have to have the viral pathogen inside. So they have to rear a bunch of caterpillars, and then my understanding is rear them with the virus and collect that. So it's very. It's not experimental. They use it mostly on the cutting edge of where the infestation is, to try keeping it slowed down. But once it's out, or once it's inside of that area, the map here, I don't want it to sound like that they just kind of leave it to, they don't do anything, but it's kind of left to the landowner to take care of. Again, where it typically doesn't kill the tree, it doesn't get a lot of support for cutting edge technology, the cost, because again, it's typically only the leading front edge is where it gets a lot of those resources because they're so expensive to produce. Yes. So the question is,
Because, the best trees are in front of the house.
mhm.
And you're the ones losing all the leaves, and the ones in the back don't do much. So are there any commercial licenses?
The question is there any commercial applicators or companies that would provide services? There are companies that will provide a service. The cost of it, I'm not real sure about. I would probably, if I was going to use that approach, I would caution landowners to say, you're going to probably only want to do that on your very limited trees. Because again, you could take all the steps, you could pick every egg mass off. But if it's surrounding your property, they're more than likely still going to come onto the property and cause some defoliation on your property. So it's, if you're doing it and your neighbor's not, it's going to be, you're still probably going to typically or likely see the same end result. So, yeah. So if there's 100 egg masses on one property, another 100, so there's potentially 200,000 caterpillars just waiting to, and typically once they do come out of the egg sacs, they will spin a web, and it's called ballooning. They let the wind take them to the next tree, and if they land on a favorable tree, their preferred food host, they'll set up shop. So if we didn't have a lot of wind, they might, but typically they're going to find their way regardless, unfortunately. Yes. So the question was about the frass or the excrement of the pest, and is it poisonous, beneficial, kind of all the above. Unfortunately, I'm trying to go through it. So the caterpillar is known to cause some allergic reactions if landowners bump into it, or it seems like now if you go out in the woods, one is going to somehow fall on your back, or so there is some allergic reactions, or some folks are prone to allergic reactions. I've heard of some phone calls I've received, their dog eating them and having an allergic reaction. So yes, that is there. Another story I had, which I don't have any backing or understanding of totally, but it kind of works. Is an individual said they purchased a bunch of plants from a home garden store and left them outside, and the frass fertilized them. And they watered through, and they noticed a very quick death of the plant that they just bought. Yes. So again, I don't have any, there's no literature that supports it, but at the same time, typically frass manure is high in nitrogen. So I thought maybe there was a potential that it may have burned the roots out, just kind of like applying fresh manure on a garden. Again, no, I have no backing or literature that supports that, but just kind of working through what it was, and it was plausible. So, but does it act like a fertilizer? Yes, but we don't want it in a strong amount. Yes.
I'm wondering, is that what that is? That it's kind of like, I feel like a lot of yellowish brown stuff. Is that the color that's
The frass, the color, or the frass, it was kind of described earlier like black peppercorns right now, or coffee grounds. They're typically black, and so what you're seeing, you're talking about the staining, that could be smushed caterpillars, that could be some of the feeding that is going on from the leaves, or it would be all those together, the excrement, because it does stain. You notice it when you're driving along the road, it leaves a nice spot on the road. So the yellow, I would have to assume that would be some pollen, because this time of year, it has been a crazy pollen year. Any other questions?
Yeah, for the tree capital, I think you just wanted you to just, if you can, let people know that there's also the Applicators and if you just be on the route.
So the tree committee was asking or wanted to plug a couple other insects that are having a detriment in the environment. The first one was the emerald ash borer, which I think a lot of us are pretty familiar with. It is a tiny green pest beetle that will fit on the head of a penny. What that does is it goes specifically after ash trees, which was not a highly preferred food source of the spongy moth, but we are seeing a lot of them dying off in this area. So what happens is the larvae from the emerald ash borer the female or the adult will lay the egg in the tree, and the larvae will burrow underneath the bark and basically disrupt the plumbing of the tree. And so it's about 5 to 7 years typically after we will see a death of the tree, and they only specifically go after ash trees. And like I said, that's very widespread throughout the area. It's been in New York since the early 2000s, mid 2000s. So we are seeing that large scale die off of a lot of ash in the environment. And unfortunately, that is a pretty popular street tree, and it is a favorable tree. They tend to like growing in groves in wet areas. So we are seeing a fair amount of death with that species, unfortunately. And then the second one, I'll take your question afterwards. And then the second one was Hemlock woolly Adelgid. And that is another pest that specifically attacks hemlock trees. And it is similar to an aphid-like insect. What it does is it will just explode, the population will explode, and it has mouth parts that just sucks the juice out of the tree and essentially sucks the life out of the tree. And that's another prolonged, slow death. It typically is about 10 years. And we have found that in Schenectady in the general area here, maybe 7 years in the environment. We have done some spraying in the plotter kill, or we've worked with Schenectady County to do some spraying in the plotter kill. There are some insecticide treatments that can be done there, but again, those are typically needing to be done with a commercial pesticide applicator. One of the things that we can look for that pest, while you're looking at the hemlock canopy, it will look like little cotton balls in the top, right next to the leaf, where the leaf connects to the branch. And that will be cognizant. That will be what we would look for in a heavy population. You had a question?
Well,
Observation?
We had 10 trees in that street.
In- Yeah, and that's when we're dealing with emerald ash borer, that is something that we do see when the pest starts taking over the tree, is that where it disrupts the plumbing, the tree will dry out fairly quickly, become brittle. So it does become a quick hazard in the landscape and in the environment. In the forested setting, we've kind of just let Mother Nature, if it's going to fall, it's going to provide a habitat. But we've been working with a lot of municipalities to try understanding what is their ash component in their street tree population, to try combating or helping individuals or communities plan for how best to approach that problem.
One more, these traps hanging in the trees about 5 years ago.
Yes.
Was that experimental, or was that removed before?
The question was the purple prism traps that you would notice hanging in the trees driving along the roads. They were indeed traps that we would set up. We were typically trying to use them as an early detection method. They were fairly effective, but what we end up finding out, it was of great outreach, because everyone, I don't know many people that didn't drive around and not see a purple trap somewhere. So it really got the word out fairly quickly compared to some of the other pests that we deal with. So inside of the trap, there would be a pheromone. And so that would we were trying to put them on the outer reaches or the front of where we knew the population was, to try finding out how extensive the population was. For the ash borer, yes. Question?
So you mentioned these two other tests, right? What did you want us to do about it? Like, if you said you keep an eye out, but what did you do?
Oh, well, the wave of the emerald ash borer is kind of beyond Niskayuna now, but I think keeping an eye on your ash trees, because they do die slowly. And then I've heard that the wood is very brittle once they're dead. So it's probably the safest thing to do if you have a declining ash tree is to take it down. If there's one in the right of way, you can call the town and we'll take it down. We try to be good about where they are, but sometimes the best eyes for the town is the people who live right there. So, and it's pretty obvious when the ash trees are in decline, because the bark starts to kind of like peel off of them and it looks lighter, and it's called blonding, if you can remember, because the bark's starting to get lighter. And so if you see that on a tree that, you know, looks like it's in the right of way, you can call us. The ash trees, I mean, I don't want to like jinx it, but I have an ash tree in my yard that's still okay. So like it's possible that there's occasional pockets of them that are still okay, which you could like watch for. But generally speaking, if they're dying, it's probably time to take them down. And then but for the Hemlock woolly Adelgid, like I know we have a population in the Leishakil that we want to try and see if there is some way that we could help, but they're still not like super prevalent in Niskayuna. So you can report them like there's like an invasive species website, you can report them, and you can also treat your own trees. So like if you catch it, like the Hemlock woolly Adelgid might be worth trying to get out of your tree potentially.
And the Hemlock woolly Adelgid, it's been in the U.S., I believe, since the 1950s, and it started in the Carolinas and has worked its way up here. And probably in New York, it started hitting the lower Hudson Valley in the early 80s. And it was kind of, all right, I don't want to say it lay dormant, but it moved really slow up into the region here because it was assumed because of the cold, the winters that we were having. So it was kind of always mentioned that we're more than likely not going to see it into the Adirondacks. And 2 or 3 years ago, it popped up in Lake George. So it's more like we're just trying to shed light on that, just letting individuals know that there is a pest out there that will kill the tree, but it's more or less just vigilance and like just getting the word out, because a lot of those pests, we talk about them, but we don't advertise them real heavily. It's after the fact what's killing my tree, or why is my tree partially dying? And they ask me to come out, or they hire an arborist, and they're like, wait a minute, how did that pest get here? Why have I not heard anything about that? So the Hemlock woolly Adelgid is starting to get a lot more attention because typically where it does grow in its natural environments, it typically grows in drainages. And so it kind of, why it's getting, if it's been around here since the 50s or so, why is it just starting to really get attention here? I can't explain that or answer that, but where we see it growing here in New York, a lot of times, as I said, in drainages, but also in the Catskill areas, it's growing around a lot of reservoirs, New York City watershed reservoirs, which are unfiltered water source. And then there's trout habitat. So we're just seeing that a lot of the larger detrimental effects potential with that pest. So we're just trying to raise a little bit more attention and awareness for it.
Yeah, and I did see we got a member of our tree council that trickled in the back there. If you do see those things and you do have questions, you can always email me. My name's Laura Robertson. I'm the town planner. I am the liaison to the tree council. Or you can, if you see one of the tree council members, you can ask them. But yeah, I think that the Hemlock woolly Adelgid, there was a pocket of it on Morgan, and I think they were able to get rid of it. Morgan has a lot of hemlocks. And yeah, if you get it up into the Adirondacks has so much evergreens. The Catskills have been fighting it for a little while, but it would definitely change the environment. So trying to keep it out of the Adirondacks is what they're trying to do right now.
I did confirm a couple areas of it in Scotia. So it's surrounding the area. And then another thing that landowners can do if you're looking to report any invasives is through IMAP invasives. That's the website. It's user friendly. You can upload a picture for it, even if you don't know if it's an invasive or you believe it is. You can take a picture of it and upload it into that website, and they can confirm it. And then it just helps us figure out kind of how extensive the populations are, or how extensive, or finding it in some new areas that it wasn't, so we can start working with some of our invasive folks to start coming up with a plan or approach on some of them.
Yeah, and you guys have been super patient and listened, and I really appreciate that. The only other one maybe to just think about, and I'm not an expert on it, but I remember the DEC put out a thing to check your pool filters for the Asian Longhorn beetle, which is like a beetle that has really, really long things that stick out. And if you see that, report it immediately, because it goes after maples. And like the Tree Council was doing a lot of of inventory of what we have in our right of way, and on the one hand, we don't have as much ash. So like I think Albany was just hammered with the ash. It cost them like $100,000 of stuff to take all their ash down. We have so many maples, so that's the one that we really want to make sure that we report if we see it.
Yeah. Asian longhorn beetle. It's fairly large, and it shows up. There's a similar pest that it's a native pest called the spotted white pine Sawyer. They look very similar, but if it's a black insect that's I think it's an inch and a half long.
But it has these like
Long
really
antennae.
antennas.
And so with that one, you can send a picture to our forest health folks, and they will confirm it or deny it right over, because the identification is very easy on that one. Then our next, I guess, we're talking about invasives. The other one that's on our radar right now is spotted lanternfly, which I wish I would have thought of.
It's pretty but deadly.
It's a very unique pest. Every lifestyle, it does not look like anything that is native in the environment.
Oops.
It's from the leafhopper family, and what it does is it just congregates. But there we go. So that's that at its leafhopper, and like I said, it's very unique looking, and so we expect if we do find populations of it, that they're going to be found relatively quickly, or because just a lot of the public, there's nothing like that. So that's
when we got one.
See the funny like is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Oh. Oh, very fancy. Yes.
This is the non-native one. That's the one you're looking for. But the native one will have a white dot attached. And that native one's native, yeah.
Yeah, that just it attacks white pines, but it doesn't kill them.
Yeah, that's what you want.
Yeah, and then the
But
Yeah.
the spotted lanternfly is really a
Oops,
big
we go.
concern because it has an extra large host that attacks over 50 different trees, and its biggest ones are agriculture or fruit plants, hops.
grapes.
And so what we're finding out is it's agriculture pest. After it decimates some of that, it starts going over to some of the trees. And so far it has been pretty non-discriminant. So right now we do have a couple positive areas in New York, near Binghamton and down in Westchester County. So we are cautiously looking for that. Like I said, if we do find that we are working with the Department of Ag and Markets to try eradicating it.
Yeah, so see something, say something. Works for a lot of things. And
When the news came up last year, initially they just said kill it, and then they said, oh, send a sample. Which is it?
Anytime that you find a pest that you're not really sure of, it's always good advice to send a picture to us. You can email it to me, or I can. If I don't know what it is, I forward it on to our forest health folks. But yes, if you're finding anything like that or suspicious, and you want to generally you want to reach out to us, and like I said, typically it can be just a picture and an email, and if we're collected, send us a picture, and if we're interested, we will come to you.
So we just go on the New York State DEC site?
Yeah, you can get again, depending on what area you're in. If you're working in this area, my email will come or you'll find my email pretty quickly, or you can have one of my business cards and forward me a picture and say, hey, give me your location, a picture of it, and I might call with some more questions.
yeah, so thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
Yep, I think you're probably subscribed to our news, which is why you're here. But if you're not subscribed, because even if Scott is a little bit leery of scraping, I think the Tree Council really wants to do a big scraping day so we can get rid of as many as we can. So we'll send all that information out to you guys when we can.
Thank you. I said, I wish we had a lot of money.
Very much.
It's a
thanks
tough pest to
Scott.
deal with, but it's just kind of being patient and working through it.
And taking care of our beautiful trees.
Yeah.
Was very sickly, that could, you know, it's getting.
Sure.
And my sister just saying her reaction